Hi, and welcome to episode 85 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. It's also episode 21 on YouTube, so please check out the YouTube if you're on the podcast. And if you're on the podcast, go check YouTube out. But today, I want to start off by dedicating this to a good man, a good friend who unfortunately passed away this year. Will be last year when this comes out. Robert Sweeney was a good man that worked in correction, and he was always helping out other people, always trying to reach out to other people. And ultimately, not only for the Department of Correction, he was a veteran. He did wonderful work for veterans. He did so many great things for people who had passed away at DOC, including a nice garden. So I want to dedicate this to someone that we both know. And I want to say that it's going to be, for me, that's an emotional thing. I really like Bob a lot, and I know that Brad did too. But let me get into who's here, right? Because you want to probably know who's here, right? So Brad is someone that that has worked in. How long did you work in for DOC, Department of Correction?
34 years, Steve.
34 years. Brad Cowen is someone who's worked for 34 years for the Department of Correction. Also someone who knew Bob very intimately, and ultimately a great guy. I've known Brad for over a couple of years now, and Brad's another guy that would give the shirt off his back if you needed it. So Brad, welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy. And maybe you can start off quickly. I'm going to let you go right away and talk maybe about Bob and what your memories are of Bob, because we both miss him.
Yeah, happy to be here, Steve. And I'll tell you, Bobby was a great guy. I got to work for him, not work with him, I should say, at Framingham. And we never really lost contact. He was one of those guys. He was a guy's guy, a Marine, part of the Marine Corps. He did have his own battles, but when he was assigned to the Employee Assistance Unit, for the Department of Correction, that was like his niche. That's where he kind of belonged, because he had so much integrity, and people just loved him. He was one of those guys that could relate to anybody, whether you're weak, strong, male, female, Caucasian, African American. He loved everybody, and that's kind of who he was. And he was like this, like I say, the Marine staunch biker, and I really appreciate you recognizing him prior to this podcast.
I'll always remember him for so many other things too, and the people that he impacted, which, I've also heard many stories about. So I think that it's important that we talk about Bob. And when you said Framingham, just for people who may not know Framingham, Massachusetts, there's a Department of Correction there that's mostly women. It's all women. And that's what we were talking about. So just for my international crowd, I got to make sure they get it all.
And I know, Steve, we're going to talk about the memorial after. We always remember memorial, but Bob was he was the backbone behind that memorial, and he took it personal for when it wasn't really taken the way he thought it should be taken by correction officers. But like I say, Bob was a special guy, and thank you again.
Well, I think that we need to get to that memorial for sure. I think that there's even, a personal link for you there that we can talk about too. But how about, usually I start off with an introduction of who the person is, say, hey, tell me about yourself. But I think it was important to talk about Bob first. I think that we need to give that dedication to Bob, and we'll definitely come back to him. But how about, Brad, you tell a little bit about yourself to the audience of Finding Your Way Through Therapy.
Yeah, so I went to Somerset High School. I graduated in 1983. While in high school, I played football, baseball, was fairly athletic. And I made the decision to join the Army National Guard with a friend of mine when I was 17 to pay for my college, basically. And I went to school for criminal justice, or should I say psychology, with a criminal justice minor. And I ended up starting to work for the Department of Correction at the age of 20. My goal was really to be a state police officer, because my next door neighbor and my best friend was a state police officer. However, when I started making rank at an early age, I was fortunate to make rank early. At like 22 years old, I was a sergeant. Correction all of a sudden became a profession for me, and it was the route that I took. So it's been it was a great road, 34 years. Everybody has their ups and downs. I don't know anybody that doesn't. But in the end, I was very proud to wear the uniform. I was proud to represent the department, and it really is an amazing agency.
The first thing that comes to mind when I hear that, Brad, is how the hell did you survive 34 years?
Yeah, it's interesting, Stephen. I think you can either try to, I think what helped me towards the end is, believe it or not, is like when I was a security guy. So it's all about, the inmates, not really worrying about the inmates or what's good for them or what isn't good for them. And I think as you mature in the agency, and I think also you mature in life, you start realizing that these are human beings. And if you really want to look at recidivism, you want to look at people not coming back and the purpose behind it. And that is like, this guy could get out and could be your aunt's next door neighbor, your father's next door neighbor. And, you want to give that person as many tools as you can to succeed while they're out there. And I think you see a lot of that, but you really have to push it down, because sometimes security staff really, they miss the big picture. But when you talk to them and you're open and transparent and get out there and they believe in you, I think you can make certain changes that are positive for the agency and also the individuals themselves.
I've worked with corrections, not only on the DOC level, Department of Correction in Massachusetts. I worked on the county level with a couple of counties around here. And I also worked with the jails and prisons up in Vermont. There is certainly a code. And one of the things that always struck me, and maybe you can speak to that, is that there were Brads, but they were few and far between, because a lot of it was a competition. I always admired you because you like, if you elevate someone, you like, great, I elevated someone. You always want to elevate someone, but I don't find that as a culture in the Department of Correction. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes, I used to talk to staff all the time, particularly as I went up rank and became a deputy DOS superintendent. I was able to meet with groups of staff and try to look at the culture and kind of where I came from uniform. That was a big advantage for me, because oftentimes folks in uniform don't respect the folks that came up through the classification piece as much, which
Right.
I'll tell you what, I've worked for a lot of great people that came from the classification piece, but that's just kind of the thing with being a person in blue, but I always tell them about how, you talk about management, how management doesn't care for people. Well, oftentimes they don't care for themselves. They don't bring each other up. They'd rather just quote shit on people. But that ends up being the culture, and it's not everywhere. It's at different ways at different institutions. Again, working at so many institutions like I did, you see the different things. But you always try to, I always try to make things positive. I tried to make a negative environment as positive as I could, which wasn't always easy. And I don't think we have enough time in a podcast to go over all the things I think that could have been improved. But yeah, I just think that trying to take a negative environment and turn it as positive as we can, I think would be the best goal. And that actually creates a safer environment for staff as well as the inmates.
Well, I think that if you want to think about it, we don't have to do just one podcast. I run this show, so maybe one day we can talk about that, because that would be helpful,
my friend. Yeah.
Because as much as I had I was mental health. I was not a Department of Corrections staff. I was never a Worcester County or what the hell, Middlesex County. I was never their staff. I was a mental health guy who was contracted. But
Yeah.
I definitely had different type of situations with people. And I know that Department of Corrections sometimes struggled with people coming from the outside. Do you think that culture still exists, or do you
Well,
think it's changed?
absolutely. So I think the problem with the culture is, I think in society, we've looked at the mental health downfall so much greater, like closing all those mental health facilities years back. They're like, oh, we should have never closed them. And now, when I first started, mental health was part of the Department of Correction. They fell under medical, but they didn't have the voice that they have today. So I know the mental health directors in every meeting in the morning, we talk about every case in the morning. We talk about every inmate in the morning, not every inmate, but every inmate that's on a watch in the morning. But I
Can you
still
tell
think that
people what a watch is before we go on? Because
oh,
people
well,
might
my
not know.
apologies. So you have a 15-minute watch, which is a close watch, and you have an eyeball watch or a one-on-one watch, which is a constant watch. And those are the folks that are having trouble dealing with either society, life. No, I shouldn't say society because they're in prison, but life or personal issues that they're dealing with, which is way above my pay grade. However, especially as a superintendent, I'm supporting the mental health staff with, we want to get the inmate off the watch as soon as we can, because it is creating overtime, it's creating issues. But more importantly, we got to do it for the individual themselves. And sometimes I think that's the piece that's missing. I think sometimes we look at, so for instance, mental health can even make decisions on sanctions for disciplinary action. So if the disciplinary board says that the inmate should have 10 days isolation, which means they're in their cell without their TV, mental health can can turn around and say, well, that's really not good for his mental health. And I don't think we should change the isolation to maybe room detention. Well, that doesn't really go over very positive
Okay.
with the uniform staff, especially folks if this inmate threatened somebody or did something very inappropriate. It's not a positive thing. However, the mental health professionals looking at the inmate personally and what their needs are. And I think because they're a private contractor and it is a contract, they want to be awarded the contract when it comes up again. So sometimes I think they give in a little more than they really need to. But those are tough decisions, that's for sure.
The stuff that I can tell you from my experience is that, I think I shared this prior to us recording here. I remember being called in a max area and saying, Steve, we need to do an evaluation. It was an active suicide attempt. And they made me wait at the door because there's like 3 doors to get the max, obviously. And they opened the door eventually because the janitor was there, and the janitor went in, and I thought I was going in. Like, no, he goes in. So I always joked around, and it's not even a joke when you really think about it, that the slosh bucket goes over mental health sometimes.
Mm. Well, I think part of that is you have to have meetings with different disciplines. So when you start looking at an agenda you want to pass, so say you want to do something with movement, inmate movement to make it more fluid. You have to bring in mental health, you have to bring in medical, you have to bring in maintenance, you have to bring in everybody, and you have to create a team. It really is a team. And when we do talk about the memorial, that was a big part of the memorial, is that everybody who worked, excuse me, in the Department of Correction would be recognized, in fact, if they in fact passed away. So that's up to the upper administration to create this team and not create division. And we all know about division. I'll just look at this country. Unfortunately, we have a lot of division.
Yeah.
But you can't have that division inside. And I also do not believe in the inmate versus staff mentality either. I think part of that needs to be together too. I think the needs of the inmate are important as well. And whether people want to think I'm a white hat or not, it doesn't really never bother me. I look at what's best for the institution, what's best for people in general. And sometimes these people just never had a chance.
Right. And I think that that's a little bit of what we want to talk about too, in general, is that, we want to know what these men and women face regularly when they're in the jail, and that the public might not know. And one of the things that I always found interesting is I tell people, like, when you go, like I would go into XYZ jail, we'll say in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. I'd go into Bridgewater, Massachusetts. When I went into the jail, it might as well have been Zimbabwe or China, or it was a complete different culture, and you needed to adapt as a mental health guy, but also the culture of the OC and the culture of the county jails. What else should the public know in regards to the men and women who work in those type of environments?
Well, so I'll say this. It's interesting. I was talking with a friend of mine just yesterday about how cold it's been. And I said, are you better off being homeless out in the city of Boston with a cardboard box and maybe a blanket, freezing your butt off, or are you better off committing a minor crime and going to jail where you're going to get 3 hot meals, you're going to get heat, you don't have to work, you don't have to get up when you want, because it's an environment that really isn't that bad. Like, granted, you lose all your freedom, but honestly, in my 34 years, and people listening to this podcast may not think I'm being honest, but I really am. Like, inmates were not mistreated. They really weren't. I did not see a cultural, systemic issue of inmates being mistreated.
Right.
I think the state of Massachusetts is also very liberal, and I think some of the things I didn't always agree with, like the releases with parole, like they want everybody released, especially for nonviolent crimes, and I always believe in the second chance. But unfortunately, there are some folks in there that really aren't ready to be released. They're not ready to be released. But if they take advantage of the opportunities to go through anger management and certain trainings and possibly get involved in religion, which I think is important, then they can be a better product when they get to society. But sometimes they just want to get out, and then we see them back 3 months later. And never mind the addiction center. The addiction center was a totally different thing for me. But I really truly believe that's the thing I would love to pose to people, is that, you deal with a lot of these advocacy groups and they act like, this is the worst thing in the world, like the correctional officer walking around with billy clubs and they're hitting people left and right. And honestly, I did not see that. I'm not telling you we didn't see verbal abuse at times. But that happens everywhere, and a lot of times that was created by by the inmate due to his actions, which after a while, if the inmate conforms to the policies and procedures of the institution, that's going to also go to the wayside too. It's like people always said, when I worked in Norfolk, we had 1,400 inmates, and out of the 1,400, 700 were lifers. That was the place for the lifers to go, was in Norfolk.
And if someone doesn't know what a lifer is, what's a lifer?
Doing natural life, doing first degree, and possibly second, but we had 700 first degree lifers.
Yeah.
Which
Just
means
want
they
to
would
make
never
sure. I got to
No,
assume
great, Steve.
some people might not know what we're talking about.
Oh, absolutely, my friend. Thank you. So with that said, people often times say, "Oh my God, you worked with like 700 lifers. That's amazing." They're the easiest population to deal with because they know that this is their home and this is where they're going to live for the rest of their life. So they want to make the best of it. And they don't want to lose their single cell. They don't want staff coming in and tearing apart the room because they used off language to somebody. So they were the best. They were the best population. Like you worked in the county, Steve. I never did. I always found county inmates because they always wanted to be that alpha male and they always wanted to prove themselves. That was a tougher environment than work, like I say, working with lifers. They were the best population to deal with.
I agree wholeheartedly. For those of you who got YouTube, you saw me point at Brad because I worked with lifers that were second degree. So they have a possibility of parole. They would come out on parole. And a lot of people are like, oh, you worked with murderers. I'm like, those were the easiest ones to work with because they knew the consequences of their actions. And I think that what I've always said to people, I'd rather work with, 20 lifers, lock the door and work with them because I'll be fine, than work with 5 people with a history of assault and battery because they don't know the consequences of their actions. And I don't know if you had the same experience, but that's certainly mine.
Oh, no, I didn't. And I remember talking with a lifer who I've known for years. Again, I started when I was 20. So I started really at a younger age. And some of these guys were 20 themselves. But, when I'm 30 years old, that means I've known them for 10 years. I'm 35, I've known them for 15. But they've been behind the wall and I've been coming in and visiting. So I had one high profile individual who was brought back on a parole violation that he really had nothing to do with, but it was something to do with New Hampshire and a murder. But I remember talking to him. He said, Cowen, he said, when I got out, that was scary. He said, the alarm went off. It scared the crap out of me because I never heard an alarm before. He said, I didn't know how to work the VCR. This is back when we had VCRs. He said, and then I was always a runner. So I went down running. And he said, and the house that was there before wasn't there. It was a different color. There was another one that was built in its place. The cars were so much faster. Everybody's tooting their horns. He said, I ended up running back to the house. He said, it was scary being out there. After being so institutionalized and getting onto society, it was tough for him. And then society, they also have the responsibility of now they have to work to get rent. They have to, work to get food. And it's just a difficult environment for him.
And I think that when you talk about that, the first thing that came to mind is on parole. I had someone who did 2 consecutive, what they would call manslaughter for 10 years. And he came out, I had a conversation. He did reentry stuff. About 3 days in, he came in crying into the office and I'm like, what's going on? We'll call him George. He's like, the machine won't give me money. I'm like, what do you mean the machine won't give me money? I went to the ATM and didn't give me money. And I said, okay, I'll go with you. It's not far. I'll walk over with you. Walked over with him. He thought that he had to speak to the machine and the machine would give him the money because he never knew to put in the card, putting in his PIN. He knew nothing of that. And I always tell people, the things that we take for granted in what I consider outside life is something that when you're doing 20 years straight, you lose sight. An ATM didn't exist in 1984 when this guy went in. And so I think that that's absolutely one of the things they face. What about, like you talk about men and women, what else do they face inside that people don't really get outside here?
So a lot of things, like you think about it, when you respond to an emergency, especially the yard, the chow hall, areas that are frequented by so many inmates or large groups of inmates, and over the airways, there's a fight in the chow hall. And most of the time when it's called in, it's not called in like it's a fight in the chow hall. It's like, there's a fight in the chow, you can tell the excitement. So right away, your blood pressure's going up and you're responding too, fight or flight. We know about the old fight, so we respond. And then you get there and it's over with. There's nothing. Inmate's walking out, he's cuffed, and second one walks out, he's cuffed. Steve, what do you do with all that adrenaline? You have all this adrenaline built up, and what do you do with it? What do you do when you walk to a cell and the cell is just full of blood because the inmate was involved in self-injurious behavior, and what they would tend to do is mix the blood with water, which made it a larger volume of blood, but still the whole cell would be full of blood. Or they write on the wall, Satan lives here, and take feces and writing feces on the wall. Those are things that people just don't see, that just scars that live with you for the rest of your life. I remember as a young sergeant, an inmate put a cigarette out in his eye. And after he put the cigarette out in his eye, he was going out to Mass Eye and Ear. He said to me, Cowen, my eye hurts. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, well, no shit, your eye hurts. You just turned around and put a friggin' cigarette out in your eye. But you look at that stuff, you're like, this is so abnormal. Guys cutting up and at the time asking for cigarettes, and they're just full of blood. And you're like, no, you need to give me the razor first. I need the razor. But those things that I just don't think people really know how to live with or deal with it. It's like an EMT, that they go to the first accident incident where somebody's dead. Just dealing with somebody that's dead and a dead body is not normal. It's just not normal when, if they're gray in color, or, say it's been a hanging, Steve, and people don't realize that when you hang, your neck stretches. So if the inmate's been there for 3 or 4, for a little while, say it could even be an hour and a half, hour, 2 hours. I don't know the exact time frame, but the vertebrae could be stretched, 8 different vertebrae, and it's just an abnormal scene.
Right.
And then you go to the officer and you tell the officer, do you need a break? Well, what's the officer going to tell you? No, I don't need a break. I don't need a break. You know why? Because I'm Teflon. Nothing bothers me. And if I do need a break, then that means that I'm powder, or I'm a doughboy, and I'm weak. Right? So and those are the tough things that people don't deal with, is the machoism of the job. And I remember like people going out by ambulance. Sometimes they're stressed, blood pressures go high. They have an asthma attack, and we got to take them out by ambulance. And officers do not want to go out by ambulance. The last thing you want to do is go out by ambulance, especially if you're cotted in front of all kinds of inmates, which we would always avoid. Take them out the back or lock everybody in. But still, it's the machoism of the job that I think people don't realize happens. It's like we talk about police officers, and I was never a police officer. Can you imagine being in a cruiser and you have somebody in a high-speed pursuit, and he almost hits the woman pushing the carriage out across the street, and then almost hits the baby that the woman's walking with? What I mean? What does that officer feel when they get out of the car? They get all this adrenaline, and but yet you're supposed to act appropriate. And what would society do? What would society do? What would the average person do when somebody spits at you in the face?
Right.
What's the average thing? You want to punch him right in the mouth. But if you punch him in the mouth, guess what? You're in trouble. And I'm not saying the punch in the mouth is always the right answer. All I'm saying is, what would Joe's society want to do? And I'm not saying those actions happen all the time, but to tell you they don't, they do happen. And sometimes it's unwarranted. So those are the things I think that's the biggest thing, is the trauma of dealing with inmate violence. How many people have even seen a seizure? Anybody that's seen a seizure before knows, like, they're violent. These grand mal seizures are violent, and if you've never seen one before, it's tough, and you got to kind of hold the guy down and hope that the other arm isn't hitting you in the face, because the person on the other side can't hold him down. When you're a new officer, dealing with the games that inmates play, because they're always going to play it, and you really realize the game as you become a seasoned officer, because you see the inmates playing it, and you go up to them and say, "Come on, what's your problem? Stop, relax." But until you become really, unfortunately, a part of that environment, when you're accepted in that environment, it's there's a lot of work to do.
I think it also desensitizes us in general. I mean, I've again, as a civilian mental health guy, I've had, urine thrown at me, I've had feces thrown at me, spit, and the whole 9 yards. But I think that what we're talking about here is a little bit of what I think you also wanted to address, which is institutional trauma. Because for me, and I'm just like, my time inside was only, a few years, but I've worked with enough correctional staff to know that there is a thought process that you can't just take, like, all right, my shift's done at 4, I'm good, I'm going to go home and I'm going to live the civilian life and I'm going to be good. Part of that institutional trauma, in my opinion. Is there other stuff that, as institutional trauma goes, that you find is important for people to know?
Just dealing with a negative environment. Dealing with folks that like for instance, a lot of people have trouble dealing with sex crimes, and when you do have to read a case, and the case is so heinous, but yet you really can't take it out on the individual that committed the crime. You really have to treat that person like they're a human being. And those are tough things to get past. They really are. It's tough when you deal with a high profile inmate that shot and killed 14 people. Even took money away from a retiree woman, that's worked her whole life to build this nest egg, and then somebody with white collar crime decides they want to just take it from her. Those are things too. Like police officers say, I deal with the individual once. You deal with the individual every day. And you deal with them. So it's almost like mind war. It's a psychological thing. Like the thing that always helped me is like people say, oh my God, you're 6'3", you're 280. And I used to be really into lifting weights and strong. But the physical piece is important as the mental piece. Like you have to know how to talk to people. My quick wit helped me a lot. And then after a while, I think my compassion and caring helped me. When I got towards the end and I worked at Norfolk, the staff would say, it's great you're out here talking to us and we appreciate it. If we feel like we're important, which they were. I would always remind them, I'm also going to talk to the inmate population too. And when I talk to them and there's something that they need, not something more than the policy dictates, but something that they're required to have, my job is to make sure that they have it.
Right. And I think that the thing that I've seen even in my short time working with the departments of corrections that I've worked with is that there's a lot more talk with de-escalation and using words. Again, I forgot to say, I worked long enough. I've never seen a baton come out. I've never seen an inmate get hit by a correctional officer. And even the people I've seen here in counseling and all that, I've never heard of anyone doing that.
Sometimes, Steve, like that's a supervision thing too. And I'll give you a good example of that. We had an issue where an inmate was being very mouthy and threatening towards a female staff member. And whether the female staff member started it or didn't start it, the inmate's saying that she started it, and she's saying, I just didn't want to, wherever he was playing games. But make a long story short, when we took him out of the cell, the direction to her was, do not be around anywhere.
Right.
And I remember she was mad at me because I asked her to leave. And I wasn't blaming her for anything. All I was saying was, what's the risk versus reward? Right? There's a lot more risk than there is reward. If I get you out of here, then I'm not going to have to worry about him spitting at you. I'm not have to worry about using force. I'm not going to have to. So I omitted that. And that's part of de-escalation. It's not giving in. It's just using a little bit of common sense. Another big piece, and I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about it, is some of the uniform staff deal with a lot of poor decisions by management or people that work for them or that they work for. For instance, somebody's never late for work, and all of a sudden they're late 5 or 6 times, and instead of talking to the officer, you get a written warning, or you're going to knock you, or instead of calling them in and finding out that the person's going through a divorce, the person just lost their mother, they don't have their babysitter, there's a lot of traffic coming into work, right? And you try to work through and say, hey, how are we going to get you to work on time? What do we need to do? Can you leave earlier? Or just even be open to it. It's only going to last for like 3 months, so we don't have to worry about this for 3 months. And that's how you take care of staff.
And I think that goes a little bit about, we talked about institutional trauma. The other thing that I think happens a whole lot is the code of silence.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you want to talk more about that, but I'm going to.
Yeah, there's actually some states that if you're found guilty of the code of silence, you can be terminated. The code of silence is real. And it's a hard thing for me to talk about only because sometimes you have to really stick with each other and you have to support each other. Not just to have a safe environment, but just to have a working environment with people. However, when you deal with a case like you did with the police officer in Minnesota, and he's holding down on a guy, and they call that positional asphyxiation, which a lot of people don't even really know about, because when you put downward pressure on an individual, they want to fight even more. Well, the other people have to come back and say, hey, like step off him, get off him. It's like when I would teach use of force, training to supervisory staff, I would always tell the supervisory staff, you really can't stop an officer from hitting an inmate once. You really can't, because you don't know that they're going to do it. But you can stop the officer from reloading and hitting the inmate again, right? So if the officer's not doing what they should be doing, or it's inappropriate what they should be doing, then pull the officer away. And then, hey, let's talk about this. Let's see why you did that. You may not see that the officer was being bit. You might not see that. So there could be a reason why the officer did it. But with the code of silence, sometimes I don't think that the staff are held accountable with each other enough. You
Right.
know, it's like the state police. You ever see a state trooper pulling somebody over without his hat on or being out of uniform? You just don't see it because they
No.
police themselves, because they say, hey, we don't do that. We wear our uniform. We're a professional group. But yet, I remember at times seeing correction officers pull into a Dunkin' Donuts. They pull into a handicap spot. Their shirt's open. First thing they do is spit on the ground. And I'm saying to myself, like guys, like, what are you doing? How are you representing the uniform? You know, and so sometimes we need to let people know, hey, and I don't want to use a bad word. There's another verbiage I use, but you need to unscrew yourself. Like, you know what I mean? You need to do better. And I would oftentimes, like, if it was a property issue, I would always have the officer who wasn't making the right decision correct it.
Right.
Like if an inmate came to me a happy hour and said, hey, I'm not getting this, I'm not getting that, I would talk to the officer and I tell the officer, hey, do me a favor. By the end of the day, you get it to him, not me. I'm not going to tell you or tell the inmate, hey, you're going to get it, but I want to make sure the inmate gets what he's supposed to get without really making a big deal out of it. So
Right.
the code of silence is prevalent, Steve. It's to a greater degree, but there's a code of silence in government. There's a code of silence with the Republican Party, with the Democratic Party. It's just part of life, and I wish I had the miracle answer, believe me, because it can be an issue and it can create a dangerous environment.
You know, I go back to something I've had a conversation with police officer Jay, who's been on my podcast many times. The code of silence to me can be really worked on when you really think about it this way. 95% of people in mental health, they're just trying to do their job. They want to make you like get better and move on in your life, and they do well. There's 5% that are schmucks, assholes, will treat you like crap. My code of silence tells me I don't cover those 5%. I don't.
Mhm.
And if we can get the police, like the problem is the media, like if a police officer does something wrong and now suddenly it's all cops are like that. Well, no, it's a 5% because there's 5% of crap everywhere you go. There's
Absolutely.
5% of correctional staff that are assholes.
Mhm.
Sorry, that's just how I see it.
Yep.
But instead of having, like, if you say, well, that one correctional officer is doing that, the code of silence does not work for that 5%.
Mhm.
People see it as, no, you fucked over the 99.9% of the team. No, you fucked over that 5% that want the code of silence and keep continuing. I don't know if you agree with me, but that's just how I perceive it.
Steve, you're 100%. Like I remember staff would come to me and they would they'd say, we're not giving enough people Christmas off, and I would say, well, why don't you get the people that are out on IA because they have a hangnail? Why don't you have them come back before Christmas? But it was amazing how many would come back after Christmas. But that person being home is one less person seniority wise getting a day off.
Right.
But yet if you go police yourself, sometimes it's a problem. But I truly believe what you said. You get that 5%, and if the 95% tell the 5%, hey, we don't agree with your actions, we don't do it this way, then it'll just create a better environment. But I think people are just afraid to upset the apricot. They really are. And I know people that take rank, they want to go home and they want to be proud, and they're like, I made sergeant and are proud, and it should be a proud thing. But part of that is when you get to work, you need to supervise. When an officer doesn't do their last round,
Right.
Well, you made sergeant, you're proud to be a sergeant, then you need to tell the officer, hey, before you go, you need to do your last round. Or yeah, you've been in the control room for the last half hour. You got to be out on the floor dealing with issues. Yeah, but it's air conditioned inside here. Well, you got to get out there. Your post is out there, and unfortunately, that isn't the case.
Can I play devil's advocate for a second with you?
Absolutely.
Okay. Because this is a story I've been told by a couple of people, and I always go, okay, I have my answer, but I want to hear someone who's been there, done that, probably has a few t-shirts. So what I've been told is like, well, if I go in the population, there's 100 of them and there's 4 of us. So we're going to get our ass kicked. That's why I don't spend time there. What would you say to someone like that?
I'm gonna say it's a crock of shit. I'm gonna say it's a crock of shit. When you get out there and you interact with these guys, and they know that you're fair, excuse me, and you can be firm,
Right.
but you're consistent, and they get to know who you are. It's like people would ask me, are you afraid to see an inmate out on the streets? Well, part of my past is I did 8 years of investigations. There were guys that got extra time due to my investigations. There were guys that got isolation time due to my investigations. There were guys that went to DDU due to my investigations. There is not one inmate that I'm worried about seeing out in the streets, because every single one of them did something wrong. I didn't plant drugs in their cell. I didn't give them a dirty urine when it wasn't a dirty urine. I never did all that. So if you're going to go out there and you're going to treat these guys fair, and you're going to, when you're walking on a tear and you walk by, say, excuse me, and thank you, the words that people don't think you can say in prison. Well, that makes it better for you. Like, I was never once afraid of 100 inmates. Now, when I'm 20 years old and I'm working in a prison, quite frankly, my balls are bigger than my brains, right? But true story. It's a lot different. I'm 20 years
Oh,
old.
I
It's
get
like,
it.
I'm just out of boot camp. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm the king of the world. Nobody's going to knock me down. But then eventually your brains catch up with you. But when you don't mistreat people and you treat people fairly, and you see it, you hit it on the head, Steve. There's 5% of knuckleheads. There really are. There's 5% of knuckleheads that are allowed to be knuckleheads.
Right.
You know, because the other 95% laugh at them. Because usually it's that 5% that when the shit hits the fan, they're running the other way versus going towards the issue you have. You know, yeah, that's an interesting dynamic.
Well, that's how I perceive it anyway. I think that if we just accepted the fact that 5% of every profession that you can think of, there's assholes.
Yeah.
And then 95% of them are trying to do their job and just go home at night. We would have a different perception. And I think
Yep.
that that's what I would say about my experience in corrections, because for that slosh bucket comment that I made before, I also had a lot of COs that would come to me. And by the way, just for the record, since I have this space, they're not guards, they're correctional officers, for the record. And that's what a CO is.
Mhm.
I remember some of the guys would come over like, hey, that guy seems a little off. What do you think I can do? Or what would you do?
Yeah.
Want me to go? Can I watch you? Or what? A lot of guys were willing to do that. And there was a 5% that F you, your mental health. And I think that that's part of it too. And I'm going to make a quick transition from that as to talk about the mental health of the correctional officers. I'm not talking about the 5%. I'm talking about the 100%.
Mhm.
And I think that one of the things that, you wanted to talk about a little bit is like, how do we address the mental health issues? Because that is a big, what's the right word? Stigma. Because I remember getting a phone call from Bob Sweeney that we mentioned earlier.
Mhm.
Bob would call me and say, we'll invent there's a CO, John Doe at Swansea. There's no jail in Swansea, Massachusetts. That's why I'm using that name. He's going into a program. He needs an outpatient. Can I really connect him with you right away? So when he leaves, he has you. And I remember that was like one of the most brilliant things. I mean, Bob did a lot of brilliant things, but that was
Yeah,
one
he
of the
did.
most brilliant things, because then that person would talk to me and go, oh, I can talk to you when I get out of, we have McLean Hospital here in Belmont, Massachusetts. And they would come and connect with me. I think that when we talk about mental health, there's like this perception that I'm going to sit here like a Freudian, or I'm going to be like, you're fucked up.
Mhm.
That's not how mental health works, but I think that's the perception sometimes of correctional staff in general. Can you speak a little bit about how they perceive the mental health stuff now?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, it kind of leads to what I said earlier, alludes to what I said earlier about it's a sign of weakness. You know, we think with Teflon. And I dealt with heartaches in my life where I lost my best friend, I lost my father, and I never went for help. And then, which I'm sure we'll talk about, when I lost my daughter, I just had enough, and I was actually retired when Amber died, and that's when I called Denise and I said, Denise, anxiety is just going through my body. I can't deal with this. Like, I can't believe I can't deal with it. Because I was always that guy. I can deal with anything. There's nothing knocking me down. But I reached a point where I couldn't deal with it. And Denise had said, hey, Bob had met this guy, and I don't know if they ever heard of him, Steve Bassan. So, but Bob met this guy, and he's perfect for you, Brad. He's like a straight shooter. He's gonna tell you how it is. He's not gonna let you deal with any bullshit him, and that's why me and you developed such a great relationship, and you helped me so much through the therapy. But there's a lot of people that really, they need it, like I don't know many clinicians or many therapists that don't seek therapy.
Right.
I think all you guys have your own therapist.
Yeah, I think that I'm looking for the top therapist. I keep on going, my therapist is therapist is therapist. I want to get to the high, but that doesn't work. But yes, absolutely. And I think that that's a good point. And
that's the
thank
problem
you.
for it's the macho thing, Steve. It really is. It's about, it's a sign of weakness. And it really isn't. It isn't a sign of weakness,
Absolutely not. I think that what I've also kind of, I'm going to allude to this now, but I'd like to talk more about what happens with correctional staff who may see, you're the devil and they wrote it in your feces and they wrote it in blood. And this is not all, if it's triggering to people, I'm sorry, but that's just things that happen. And just really, I've seen it. I think that for me, when I think about mental health, there's a stigma, but it's also because not everyone has the cultural competency to work with someone with correctional staff.
Hmm.
And I don't know if that plays a factor for some people, but I know for me, a lot of people like, oh, you've been there. And then I talk about the institutions or whatever. And they'd be like, oh, so you know how it is. And then they'd suddenly trust would come in. Do you feel that maybe that's what we need to do, a little more cultural competency in order to get more therapists involved and have the correctional staff trust it more?
I think for me, it was meeting the right therapist. And how do you match therapists? Are you better off going to a male going to a female therapist, a female going to a female therapist? Well, even that, that even matters. If you're African American, you go like what it's who you can relate to, I think, in your personality.
Right.
And some people don't like to be told the real deal, and some people might think that your style is offensive, where I think is the best freaking style in the world, right? So it's a matter of matching people and figuring out what's best for you. Like you may want that person that says, "Oh, it's gonna be okay if you just go do this," versus, "Hey, put your big boy pants on, get your ass out of bed, and stop feeling bad for yourself." Right? Two different forms, correct?
Right.
So but yet they both might work for different people. Like the other form might work for somebody else. That's how they can deal with things. And yourself, your plate's busy too, so you can't always take the time to get another good client or somebody that you can really help. And your experiences working in prison or working in a prison setting is beneficial to deal with a guy like me who's worked in a prison setting that has trauma that I don't even know I have. Right. When they talk about PTSD, right, we'll never be recognized for having PTSD, but I have PTSD. Like, I have to have my back to the wall when I go out to eat. I'm always looking at people's hands. I'm always looking at interactions. When I was helping my buddy at his bar in Fall River, I saw fights that were going to happen before they even happened, just because of my experience working inside. And you just start seeing this and seeing that, and you become part of that. But going back to your question with the therapy, it's just matching. It's matching the right therapist. And I really don't know the answer to that, but
Oh, I've got an answer for you. This is something I wish, me and Bob had this conversation. I keep on coming back to Bob, God rest
there's
his
a reason
soul. I
why,
love
though.
my
There's
Bob.
a reason why.
Bob would always say, like, if Steve doesn't work for you, I have 3 other people I can refer you to. And I
Mhm.
always thought that was a brilliant way of saying, don't give up after one bad therapist. And I'm not saying
Uh-huh.
I'm a bad therapist, but maybe they didn't like me. I'm not your cup of tea. I'm not everyone's cup of tea, and I'm fine with that. And I think that that's what Bob did that was very unique that I don't hear a whole lot. And I wonder if that would also help when your correctional staff may need a therapist. Like, well, Steve might not be your cup of tea, but Jane might be, or Courtney, or Stephanie, or what have you, or John, or Bill. I don't care. But ultimately, what I would say to you is that one of the ways to solve that is that stop thinking that you saw one mental health counselor, it didn't work out, all mental health counselors suck. No, it might be the 5% that sucks and the
Yeah,
95% that are
yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah. But Bob also had a unique way about him too that was believable, and he had the integrity, and he walked the walk, and he talked the talk. And Bob was one of those guys. He wasn't management. He was a CO. He was, like I say, a Marine Corps, believed in the Marine Corps. And biggest thing with Bob fought his own demons.
Right.
So Bob could relate, and when he talked to people, people just like, he was this bigger than life guy, just a bigger than life guy. Like, we gave the best hugs, me and him, because he's just a big bear, big teddy bear.
I think that this is a great place to transition because I think Bob is a big teddy bear. You are a big teddy
Mhm.
bear, frankly.
Thank you, buddy.
Um, at risk of breaking a wall here, I've hugged both of you and I'm fine with it. But I would like to hear more a little bit of, because you had a daughter, Amber,
Yes. Yep.
who worked in a correctional setting, and I don't want to say the story. That's not my story to tell. I'd like you to tell a little bit of story of your daughter because I think that's an important one to talk about.
Yeah. So Amber was a correctional program officer. She started working for Spectrum, doing reentry, and she really believed in the process and believed in helping other people. And Amber was an interesting soul because she grew up with people that were friends of mine that were now superintendents and deputy commissioners, but yet she didn't even want people to know who I was. She didn't want to know that her father was a superintendent. She was like really guarded with that. And her husband, who was a correction officer, who was also a Marine, was over in Iraq. There was there was incidents of domestic violence, but they weren't physical. It was always emotional, and Anne was never put on a pedestal. She was never told how beautiful she is. She was never told how good she cooks. She just was put on a pedestal. And he was very much of an introvert and very socially awkward, and he was also very much narcissistic. But those are all things that, as a parent, I could see. But how do you tell your daughter, hey, this guy isn't for you? And because what ends up happening is I lose my daughter, and she just is going to follow the love anyway, and she truly did love him.
Right.
So she left him for 6 months, and then they got back together, and they got back together for about a year and a half, 2 years, I would say. And then things wouldn't change, and she left him again. And we weren't surprised, or it wouldn't have been shocking to us if we knew that we found out that he committed suicide. And it wouldn't have shocked us to know that he committed suicide in front of Amber due to that narcissistic behavior of wanting to be in control. Like, hey, now you're going to live with this for the rest of your life. But he made a decision to take Amber's life and then take his life, which changed my life forever. And it impacted the department a lot because of who she was. And that's why I think I get the most emotional, is how much Amber, at such a young age, truly impacted people in such a positive way. Like, when we talk about being positive, every morning she worked at Palmville Correctional Center. She'd say, good morning, how are you? How's your weekend? How's your mom doing? If the mother wasn't waiting for surgery or something, she would really gut it. And nobody ever, because people ended up finding out who her dad was, and nobody ever held that against her because of who she was, and so when she passed away, and I don't know whether you want me to go into the memorial that was created or not yet.
Look, Brad, this is your interview. You go wherever the hell you want.
I hear you, brother. So what ended up happening, because of the love that they had for her at Palmville, and staff were they were crushed at Palmville, they were crushed at Old Colony. They locked down for a little while at both institutions. Palmville decided that they wanted to create a memorial for Amber. And when they wanted to create the memorial, they wanted myself and Lisa, Amber's mom, on the committee. And we also had Amber's best friend, and I think Amber's aunt was on the committee. And as we started talking about this memorial, we started really leaning towards, why don't we create a perpetual memorial? And the thought process is, if we do a memorial, in 5 years, people aren't going to remember Amber as much as they do today. In 10 years, they're going to remember even less, because people transfer, people retire. Eventually, the institution's filled with people that never even worked with her. And then in 20 years, the shift command is going to be like, "Will you go mow the grass at that memorial? It looks like shit. And by the way, who the hell is Amber Cowen?"
Right.
So with the thought process of us losing the Department of Correction, we lose approximately 6 to 8 offices, maintenance, managers, chaplains, CPOs, whoever, clerical staff. We lose them every year. When you have 4,000 employees, that's what happens. You're going to lose people during the course of their duty. So what we decided was, hey, why don't we create a memorial for all Department of Correction staff that gives us a nice place for peace and healing that people can go. And the idea just blew up. It just really blew up. But we talked about Bob Sweeney. Now Bob Sweeney took the bull by the horns and donated his own money, donated his time, and he made this his mission, that he wanted to do something for correctional staff. It wasn't just about Amber Nicole Cowen. It was about corrections. It was about people, like everybody that worked behind the wall. And to be honest with you, Bob had some pushback. He had some pushback because, one, I was a superintendent, so staff think automatically, that don't know me, that this is a management thing, it's an administrative thing.
Right.
And then inmates also had a lot to do with clearing the ground, like, because there's a path in the back called Amber's Way. And they were like, well, there's Bobos on the ground. We don't want to be part of this, which is really, really ignorant. And,
right.
And it's very, very juvenile as far as I'm concerned, because the inmates are humans too. Like I remember going into institutions and people would say, don't use that bathroom. That's an inmate bathroom. Well, Steve, I would use an inmate bathroom any day because it's cleaner than the staff bathroom. Right. And that's the truth.
I agree.
So when it comes to that, who cares if they did that? I don't see these people from other institutions volunteering to clear the land. I don't see them volunteering to dig a trench, But what's happened with the memorial is I believe we've had 10 services already from folks from Susan Baranowski to Shirley to special ops to and what's happened is more and more people have gone to the memorial, and it's become a bigger and bigger deal where other states actually want to model the memorial, and
Awesome.
the committee still affords us the opportunity. Lisa just decorated the memorial for Christmas or the holiday season the other day. She'll decorate it again come spring. And whenever there is a memorial service, we go. Oftentimes I'll speak, but it's not about Amber. It's about whoever it is that passed away. It's their day. It's their day to be remembered for the services that they provided.
Well, I appreciate you sharing the story, first of all. I also know that I was there at the pre-ceremony. And it's also what I've loved about it too, is that it's also grouped per the Department of Correction where they worked.
Yes.
And
Yep.
so, you can, like, and again, I'm not saying people feel that way, but let's say you don't care about Walpole
Yeah.
or Cedar Junction, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Then you don't have to look at that one. You want to go see where, you want to go see Gardner, you want to go see Sousa, you want to go see whatever, you have that capacity to do so and just look at those people and hopefully they'll remember, because we do this for police, we do that for fire. Bob's idea was phenomenal, and I knew all the
Yeah.
pushbacks that he had, and that'll live forever.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. One of the things that's always lost is like, oh well, the inmates are going to take care of it. What do you think the inmates are going to do to it? I mean, what is
Mhm.
wrong with you?
Yeah, exactly. We don't have a camera. There's no cameras on that site. It's something we want freedom of people just to come here. Like I said, it's a place of peace and healing. We added a retiree wall where retirees that have passed, they can actually go on the wall. We're still looking to make that grow a little bit more. And the commissioner, Carol Michi's been behind it 110%. She's building a pavilion in the event of inclement weather when we do these services. She has the honor guard go to all the services, which I think is very important because the honor guard, we're a nationally recognized honor guard. The Department of Correction is, but I call it unselfishly selfish, Steve. It's like where we don't make it about Amber, so that's the selfish part. But the selfish part is she's always remembered, and until we die, she's always going to be remembered because the bench right before the main part of the memorial is to Amber Nicole Cowen. With a beautiful saying. So that's created a lot of healing for me and Lisa, but it's really created a lot of healing for the Department of Correction and those family members. Like when you got an 8 or 9-year-old kid that their dad is like a superhero that day, like their dad, like the honor guard's here for my dad. All these people are here for my dad. My dad was somebody. And isn't it great to be somebody, and even for that day, that there's somebody, and the kid, those kids will remember that the rest of their life, how their father was or mother was memorialized on that day,
Again, at the risk of breaking a wall, I obviously me and you have talked about Amber. I know Bob and I
Yes.
talked about Amber, but other people who didn't know of us, and they would tell me about Amber and how, how sad they were and how they were touched by her and how human she was. And it always struck me because, obviously, everyone say, well, but it's your daughter. No,
Yeah.
she was universal. There's no, like, I'm not,
Yeah.
me, I don't BS.
Yeah.
She was universally loved. And, if she was the push that got that garden done, then so be it.
Yeah. 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 She didn't die in vain. Something good came out of it. And that's kind of what you have to look at. Like, so we think oftentimes when we lose the loved one, we always want them to be remembered. Like I never want him or her forgotten, and when you can put something in place like this that's beneficial for the whole agency, and an agency that she would have been flourishing in for years to come. She really loved her job. She really loved helping people. I'm sure she would have had disappointments at some point in her career because I think everybody does. But she was somebody that the staff just loved her. She'd go cook this coffee cake that Lisa will cook every year on the 27th of June, the day she passed. We always we always deliver pizzas and stuff to Palmville for the staff so they remember, and we'll do that until we pass on. And we go to events, Lisa will bring coffee cake with the recipe that Amber had. Right down to the superintendent like the buffalo dip. And a lot of times somebody going in and giving the superintendent buffalo dip, people look at it like it's saying, what a kiss ass. You know what I mean? But
No,
Amber didn't understand it. Amber, to her, a superintendent was okay, it's a superintendent, but she loved the correction officer more. Like she got it. You know what I mean? She just really understood it. She had that quality of love, true love that people just embraced. And they miss it.
again, it's hard to move from Amber, but I will as
Oh, good. Yeah.
we wrap up the hour already. Went by
Wow. Holy
really
cow.
fast. Um, I want to finish because you're not here to plug anything. You're just here to be yourself, wanted to educate people. First of all, I might have you back on. Are you willing to do that? Because I have a
Oh,
couple of ideas.
anytime, my friend. Anytime.
Perfect. The other thing too is that for a correctional officer or anyone, but particularly a correctional officer or someone who works, I call them correctional staff because
Yep.
you can be the superintendent, you can be the CO, you can be the janitor. I don't care. Um, how what would you tell them to say, look, go get the help and stop kind of like putting your pride before everything else?
I think that's a culture. I think that's where collectively you have to accept it and say, hey, you got to take care of yourself first. You got to take care of your family first. This isn't about the machoism of so like when it came to a suicide, I wouldn't even. I'd ask the officer if they're okay, and I could tell by the look in their eyes that they're not okay. And I would tell them, hey, do me a favor. We're going to have you relieved, not for any other reason. And I want you to write the report where you have a clear head, which is a good practice anyway. But
Right.
it was really to get him or her away from the area they're in, So I was making the decision for them, but yet giving them a little way out, right? When somebody's having trouble at home, or they're going through a divorce and having a tough time with a divorce, or having a tough time with their mother who's getting ready to move on to be with God, the supervisors need to sometimes go to the people that they know and say, hey, so and so, John Doe's having trouble. Can we make sure that John Doe isn't working in a tower? Because in towers we have weapons. But then you have to say, oh my God, what were they? They're probably going to kill themselves. We have to, so we always end up being paranoid with things that we do, but some things have to be kept in house sometimes. And Steve, we have to put our staff first, man. They're just so fragile. They're so fragile. And, I can talk it all I want. But I see people that talk it, but I see people that never walked it.
Right.
I think you need to, when you walk around and staff, they have a thing called encouraging the heart. That's one of the 5 practices of leadership. And people think that, oh yeah, if when you give an attaboy letter or you give an award, that's how we help people deal with their processes. But I truly believe when you go out and you ask them and you make them look like human beings, and you know that they have a mother, and when you know they have a sick father, especially when you're the superintendent, they look at it like, oh my God, like this person actually came out and want to see how I was doing,
Right.
and I think those are things that you really have to look at. It starts at the top, and then it starts with supervision. Like you always have that person that will make a collection for somebody because they're going through a problem and they want to make sure that they have gifts under the tree or wherever it may be. But you got to do that for everybody. You can't just do it for the person that's a favorable officer or so.
Right.
But yeah, I think culture is a big part of it. It's just making it positive, having a good wellness program, a program that people believe in, getting together and doing things as groups.
Right.
I just think that's a positive thing, and I always think that meetings and open transparency was always good too. Like we would meet every in-service week, and we would talk to the staff, and just sometimes it wasn't easy because staff would be mad at me for something that I did, well, they think I did.
Right.
But I would tell them straight up. They didn't always like my answer. Like I was never a yes man, and I know Steve Bassan isn't a yes man. But that's what worked for me. And I never changed who I was. I would try to do it appropriately, but I wouldn't just say, yeah, you're kind of right. When no, you're wrong.
You're
Like
wrong.
this is why we do things. And if I'm going to offer, or if I'm going to allow folks to have their own opinion, well, guess what? I should be able to have my opinion as well. And I'm not telling you that my opinion is trumping you. All I'm saying is I have an opinion also.
Right.
And it's unbelievable how if you get out and talk to people and make them feel like they're part of the process, when you look at creating a new policy and a new procedure, why not take the person that works in the area? Like if I want to do a new procedure on segregation, why not have the person that's running the unit at these meetings, right, telling me how it really goes? Like we had post orders, and I'd always want the post orders to go out to the post, and I want the officer to read it, and then I want the officer to sign the top. Well, the union would come to me like, you're setting them up, you make them sign the top. I'm like, no, I'm having them sign the top because I want to make sure they have the opportunity to read it. That's
Right.
why I'm having them sign the top. I'm not locking them into anything in it. But if we do movement at 7:30 and the post orders say you do movement at 8:00, well, I need to know that that's what I want the post orders to be right.
Right.
I rather us run the operation based on practice than run the operation based on policy and procedure. your practice should meet your policy and procedure. Really, not your procedure, policy and procedure should meet your practice.
Right.
So
I think that that's great advice. I'll tell you that what Jay Ball, who's been on my podcast before, works as an officer.
he's excellent. I listened to him a couple of times. He's excellent.
One of the things he said is it starts with leadership, and the
Yes.
leadership being like, and again, there's no attack on anyone in particular here. So please, if anyone's listening and you happen to be like, the commissioner, the deputy commissioner, I'm not attacking anyone. Go walk the jail, go talk to the guys, go see what they need and ask those questions. And if the leadership shows how to reach out to mental health, how they, you don't need to care so much, but you need to at least listen to people. I think that if you start with leadership, it will trickle down. And it's rare that I believe in trickle down, but in this particular case, I definitely believe in trickle down. So if you normalize mental health on a leadership level, you will normalize it on a whatever level. I'm not much of a, I know that you guys are pseudo military and all that fun stuff, but I'm not much of that stuff. And it's just feeling that wait a minute. The superintendent talked about mental health and saying how to reach out and what's good. And wow, okay, well, maybe I can do it. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but long term, that will have that impact. And when Jay says that, I think it makes perfect sense to me. And I think the correctional world would really benefit from the same type of leadership.
Yes, very true. Leadership is paramount. It really is. And, me put my hand on somebody's shoulder and them feeling the love going through my hand that I, that I'm here and I care for them. It goes a long way. It really does. But again, you can talk it all you want. You got to be able to walk it. And there's a lot of people that talk it, but they don't walk it.
Well, Brad, I want to thank you. I know that people don't know a couple of things here. I want to share this because it's funny. I'm in my office and you're in the next room, and that's the way we're recording it. Number one. Number two, there's a great woman in your room with you right now, and it is Lisa. And even though she can't hear me right now, and I know she listens, I want to thank her for being there and being strong and just ultimately just being a great example for a whole lot of people. And I really appreciate her. Brad, I appreciate you more than you'll ever know. I hope I will have you back on. I'm pretty sure I have a few ideas. We'll talk about it.
Oh, no, it'd be great. And a couple of things with Lisa, just because it'd be remiss if I didn't say it. One, she also worked 24 years in corrections as a correction officer. And a lot of the reason why I ever had all that love was because of her mother. So.
And I knew that, but I didn't want to say it. I wanted you to say it's not my news to give, so to speak.
All right, my friend.
Well, Brad, thank you.
And thank you, Steve. Thank you for doing what you do.
Appreciate it.